everyone. Here we are in section 8.5. I'm doing section 8.5 before 8.4 on purpose because some of the information in this is useful for section 8.4. So I have defined the term mutation and discussed the positive and negative ways mutations can affect microorganisms. So a mutation is a heritable change in DNA, or if you're an RNA virus, in RNA. But heritable means it can be passed from one generation to the next, inheritable. And so a mutation is a change in DNA that can be passed from one generation to the next. If you're an RNA virus, it's a change in your RNA. And so mutations happen all the time. And there's a funny thing about mutations that we think of, it kind of has that connotation of something bad. But these mutations happen naturally, I say, during DNA replication or as a result of a mutagen. Now, I'm just going to back up and remind you of this picture I had right here. We looked at this little picture before. And remember, we just talked about the flow of genetic information from DNA to RNA to protein. But when cells are copying themselves, every cell has DNA, and you have to copy the DNA to make more cells. So I'm going to use a molecule of DNA, and I'm going to copy it, I'm going to replicate it to make another molecule of DNA. So you've got to do that for cells to multiply, for normal reproduction to occur. So our cells are always copying themselves, they're always making new DNA, and you can imagine every once in a while there could be a mistake. It didn't get copied perfectly. So when we say mutations can occur naturally during DNA replication, during the normal cell division process, and that happens, or a result of a mutagen. A mutagen can be a chemical or an environmental condition that causes damage to DNA. So for example, ultraviolet light is a mutagen. We are told not to go out in the sun without sunscreen, to cover up, to not get sunburn, because ultraviolet light, not only does it make our skin red and can damage the quality of our skin, but it actually can damage our DNA. And that's why getting a sunburn can actually cause cancer, because if you damage the DNA that controls how fast your cells divide, your cells might divide uncontrollably, and that's characteristic of cancer, or that is cancer. So mutagens can be things like ultraviolet light that damages DNA, but we're also exposed to all sorts of chemicals in our environment that can be mutagens. So asbestos, there's all sorts of chemicals in tobacco smoke or smoke in general that can be mutagens. So all of these things are what we call mutagens, can change your DNA. So the idea is, remember, our DNA is like the master cookbook. It's got all the instructions on how to make all the proteins in your cells. And if you change the instructions in one of the recipes, you're going to change the instructions in the RNA. And you're potentially going to change your product. But go back to the cooking analogy. If I have a recipe and I change one thing, I'm gonna change one thing in that recipe, my product may or may not change. It might actually make it better. It might actually have no impact on it. Or it might have devastating impact. So when we have mutations, you can have different outcomes. The change in the DNA may cause no change in the protein. So we changed our recipe a little bit, but nope, I didn't even notice a different taste. Seems fine to me. No change in the protein structure. So when I said mutations have this kind of connotation of like they're bad, well, sometimes they actually have no impact. They're just changes. So if the protein remains unchanged, it's not going to have any impact on the organism, on the bacterial cell or the virus or the human cell. So some mutations have no change in the protein structure and function and no change to the organism. Some mutations have a complete loss of normal protein structure or function. So I made a change in my recipe that was something big, and let's say I forgot to add baking soda, and that could result in a really different product. So the cake that I was going to make isn't going to rise. It's going to be really a lot different. Now, it might still be able to function a little bit, but it's just not the same. It's going to be an inferior quality. So sometimes we get some or complete loss of normal protein structure and function. And that may or may not have a negative effect on the organism, but usually it's, it could be bad. I could change my protein and have minimal impact on the organism depending on what the protein is and how important it is. Some mutations might actually improve the protein. And this is really the foundation of evolution, that we all have genetic variety. We all have mutations that make us different from each other. And every once in a while, one of those mutations gives us an improvement. We can run faster. We can think faster. We can we repair our DNA damage faster, so we're not as likely to get cancer. There's all these variations that we have that can be improvements. So I took my recipe, I made a change to it, I made a mutation, but this time my cake's fluffier, and I think it actually tastes more delicious. So sometimes mutations improve protein function and may or may not have beneficial effects on the overall organism. So mutations are changes in the DNA that may or may not impact what our organism can do. So I'm coming back to this picture. We looked at this in the last video, and it said, but I have a different outcome here. It says, explain why RNA viruses are more likely to mutate than DNA viruses. And so we mentioned a little bit about RNA viruses already. We said that there are viruses that only have RNA, and we talked about retroviruses. But there's all sorts of viruses that only have RNA. Remember, we said viruses have DNA or RNA. And so back to this picture with deoxyribose and ribose. And I showed you that deoxyribose is just missing an oxygen. There's barely any difference between these two. Deoxyribose is in DNA, ribose is in RNA. But this does an important thing. By not having this oxygen, it makes the whole DNA molecule more stable, more chemically stable. DNA is more chemically stable than RNA because of, in large part, due to the presence of deoxyribose or ribose. Ribose makes RNA more susceptible to mutations. And what that means is RNA viruses are more likely to get mutations and change. And you've heard about the consequences of viruses changing. We talk about how we get new influenza vaccines every year because the virus is different than it was last year. And it's because of mutations. So we talked about some of the retroviruses like HIV, but other RNA viruses that you've heard about, the coronaviruses, specifically COVID-19 that everybody knows about. But SARS and MERS, you might have heard of those. They're also coronaviruses. These are RNA viruses. And you might remember during the pandemic when we got a vaccine and then they changed the vaccine a little bit, and we got another vaccine and then they changed the vaccine a little bit, because coronaviruses are RNA viruses. Genetically, they're going to change. They're going to have more mutations, and so it's going to outsmart our immune system, and we need to make new vaccines against a virus that has changed slightly. Influenza is an RNA virus. So when we get the flu, influenza is caused by an RNA virus. That's why we have a new flu vaccine every year. It's not that the first one wore off. It's that the virus that's circulating now is different than the one last year due to mutations. Oh, I put this here. I was thinking, why did I put this guy here? Here, this is actually a picture of coronaviruses with a little crown of spikes around them. Here's a palm civet. This is the animal where they think SARS started, and then it mutated in a way that it became infected humans easily. So it went from the virus was in an animal and it jumped to humans. Here's some other diseases: dengue, West Nile virus, Ebola. These are all RNA viruses. I put measles on here. And, you know, the funny thing about measles is if you've gotten the vaccine, you are very unlikely to get measles. I think you're like 97% protected if you've gotten, I don't know if we get 2 boosters when we're a kid or whatever, but anyway, when you're a little kid, if you get the measles vaccine, you never have to get another measles vaccine. And the number of mutations that causes a major change in the virus, that changes the virus's ability to infect us, can vary depending on the virus. Measles actually would need 5 specific mutations simultaneously to be able to avoid our vaccine that we're using now. So, and it just is a quality of the measles virus. It just has a lot of different antigens on the surface that our body responds to and can make antibodies to. So measles vaccine, even though the measles virus is an RNA virus, it actually needs 5 mutations, 5 very specific mutations to happen all at once to be able to avoid that vaccine. And that's pretty unlikely. Whereas influenza can make 1 change and avoid our immune system. And I put this here. Some of you might have heard of bird flu, the H5N1 virus, influenza virus. The bird flu virus is actually more deadly than our typical human influenza viruses. And what we know, and we talk about this a lot and we worry about it a lot, because the bird flu virus only needs 1 specific mutation to happen in order to be easily transmitted between humans. So instead of, it's hard for us to catch bird flu. Some people do, but it's not a very likely thing to happen. But there is a specific mutation that could happen that could make humans more susceptible, which is why we really try to keep an eye on it. And there's a lot of work and research that goes into keeping track of bird flu, because this is one of those that could cause us a big problem. Okay, I'm going to stop right there.